That is just beautiful, Sam.
Yeah, it's beautiful. We don't have enough good architects. Well, it's now 6 o'clock, so I'm gonna call to order the December 4th. You're not ready?
Yeah, we're still waiting,
You know,
because Jean and.
nothing.
Sean's not gonna.
We messaged.
Okay.
Jing is trying to get into the garage, and she said it's a backup. So, I mean, we could start, I could do roll call.
Why are we waiting?
We're not.
They were for Jing.
We all ready. I don't know.
We can start if you guys want. Well, let's.
Well, it's 6:02, so I'm gonna start.
We should start.
We're ready. This is the December 4th meeting of the City of Santa Monica Planning Commission. And call to order. Are we going to,
We do the pledge.
let's do a pledge of allegiance?
That's a good idea.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's have the roll call.
Commissioner Chalker? Present. Commissioner Fresco?
Here.
Commissioner Lambert?
Here.
No, Commissioner Lambert is, I'm sorry, Commissioner Landris might be joining us later. And then Commissioner Reese
Present.
and Chair Tolkien.
Present. Next is the Planning Director's report.
Okay, good evening, Commission. So upcoming at your next meeting on December 18th is the discussion on airport conversion project guiding principles. So that'll be a presentation from the Public Works staff. And then there's a project at 1420 20th. That is one of the Builders Remedy housing projects. It's housing and hotel projects. So that will be before the Commission that night. The January 1st meeting is canceled, as you might expect. Yeah. January 15th, there's an ROI for state law compliance and also update on the 2024 legislative platform for the city. Recent and upcoming ARB issues. So this past Monday night, the ARB reviewed the project at 1420 20th that you'll be seeing on December 18th. So the requirement was that there was a preliminary review of that project. So ARB held that on Monday. The same night, they also reviewed a housing project at 2919 Wilshire. That's the Jerry's Liquor site. And that project was continued with comments. And then coming up on December 16th, there's several housing projects, 1217 Euclid, 1931 Wilshire, 1435 Fifth, and 1673 Ninth. And then for Landmarks Commission, on November 18th, the commission approved a certificate of appropriateness for the pier sign restoration. So that will be, the sign will be removed as part of the pier bridge replacement. The sign will be restored and then reinstalled once the pier bridge is complete. And then the Landmarks Commission meeting on December 9th is canceled. Recent city council actions. So November 11th, the commission heard the appeal of the Compass Rose at the airport. The commission upheld the approval and denied the appeal. So after many years, that is resolved and the Compass Rose is a landmark ROI for fence wall hedge in the R2, R3, and R4, and then also a resolution related to fence wall hedge enforcement, making the enforcement the lowest priority for code enforcement. And then upcoming on December 10th at City Council is the installation of the new council. And then on December 17th, amendment of the IZO to extend the operating hours for cannabis businesses. So that would allow them to stay open later at night.
I have a question.
Yes.
What's the next step for the ROI for the fence wall hedge?
Yeah, so the city council adopted that ROI, so that initiated the process fresh, right? So the prior process was vacated because of concerns over a potential conflict. So the next step really is we will be bringing back the ordinance after we've, done all the public outreach per the council direction. So it'll come back to the planning commission for your recommendation.
Will there be any involvement by the new city council in proceeding on this?
Well, to the extent that that direction was given, we're following through on the direction.
Until you hear otherwise?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
I'd like to announce that if anybody wishes to speak on the items before us, they should submit a chip to the secretary of the commission before those items are heard. And do the commissioners have any announcements?
I do. I just want to say, I've driven by the Vons project a couple times in the past week. It is a really handsome project. My kudos to the design team and city staff and the ARB for, it's beautiful. I think it's really going to stand out in excellence in Santa Monica, so just wanted to say that.
I agree with that too, and I would say that the whole Lincoln Boulevard with the new projects and the wide sidewalks makes a world of difference.
Now, it's time for public input. If there's something that's subject to the commission's review, you can speak now. I have one shit from Jerry Rubin. Hi, Jerry.
Well, thank you.
The mic, Jerry.
We'll do it.
There we go.
All right, is that okay? All right. Well, thank you, Chair Tolkien and commissioners, city staff, fellow Santa Monicans. Hope you all had a happy Thanksgiving. Probably be good if we had some kind of Thanksgiving or gratitude day every day. That wouldn't be bad. I want to wish you all season's greetings. And I particularly want to say how much gratitude I feel, and so many do, for David Martin. I know this isn't his last meeting. There'll be one more, but just in case, I want to say I think you've been one of the best city staff people that I had the pleasure of knowing. And now I would like to talk about something that I guess you expect me to talk about already, and that's our trees. Next year is the 150th anniversary of Santa Monica, and Judy Abdu, who is the first co-chair of our Urban Forest Task Force when it started 13 years ago, said maybe some trees could be given away on that special day. Maybe 150, maybe. In other words, I hope all of you could think about that as we move to the future, that we move towards any possible involvement in the Olympics, and how much we care about our environment and how important trees are to our environment. That's why I've been learning a lot and feel really honored to be part of the Urban Forest Task Force. And it feels good to me, like I'll be 81 years old, the same day as our Urban Forest Task Force meets on December 11th at the library. So I'm going to bring some cupcakes, and if you're all free, it'd be good if you could hang out for the meeting. That's the most important thing, but if you want a cupcake and give me a hug and help sing happy birthday, I kind of like acknowledging my birthday publicly with good people. It makes me think how lucky I am to be this age. Really. So I'm not afraid of getting older. I'm just grateful for being that way. So it'll start at 6 o'clock. It'll be just a short thing, a cupcake eating ceremony. And then at 6:30, the meeting starts. It's upstairs at the main library on December 11th. And I'm also really looking forward to December 10th, when our new dedicated city council members are going to be, what's the word, appointed? And I think and hope that everybody could use that as an opportunity to come together, because there's been so much vitriol, and that's just not necessary in a great city like Santa Monica. We can disagree and just work together for win-win solutions. Thank you.
Jerry,
Yes.
happy birthday. I'm not gonna sing tonight, but
No,
happy
that's
birthday.
all right. Thank you so much, Jim. I love you, man. Thank you.
I have another request to speak from an Ann Rothstein.
Close. Amy Gottstein.
Sort of.
Good evening. It's fanciful for this board to think that code enforcement and building and safety is not under your purview. That's false. And I am here to talk again about the failure of those departments, staff members, to uphold existing policies and regulations relating to tenants' rights. This is a problem, and for at least 6 years, David Martin has known about it and never did anything. Now, as of today, there is no successor for his position chosen. I confirmed that today. And that's going to be a hard position to fill because so much has been swept under the rug over all these years. But meanwhile, tenants, especially when I'm talking about Santa Monica Municipal Code 8.100, don't have those rights. They actually exist only in writing, but not in real life. So it's a false notion to refer me to documents posted on the city website, as Mr. Martin did in a recent letter to me, because those rights don't exist. And there's a neglect to acknowledge that. And it's really important. And those regulations affect people in their most vulnerable moments when construction is taking place in their unit where they live, and it can be uninhabitable. So these are some of the many things under code enforcement purview and building and safety purview that staff are ignoring. It is also false that no data exists about how many means and methods reports were written, and also how many proofs of service have or have not been returned as part of this same regulation. So I implore you to become familiar with these policies, because I'm going to make sure that David Martin's successor knows all about this and doesn't allow it to continue. Now, thank you so much.
Excuse me. Have you discussed all this with the rent control board?
We're not talking about rent control policies here. We're talking about policies under your purview. Code enforcement and building and safety specifically.
Is there a building and safety commission in the city?
No, this is
No, it's
your
not, but,
commission. It
no.
is.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Like I said, it's fanciful to think that it's not.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next is the consent calendar. Is there any ex parte disclosures from the council members? Anybody want to pull this, or should we just vote?
I'll make a motion to move the consent calendar. I'll make a motion to move the consent calendar.
Okay.
Second.
Six-
Yeah, you can take a voice vote on that?
Yes. Take a roll.
No, it doesn't, a voice vote. It can be a voice vote.
All, just say
All in favor, say
All in
aye.
favor?
All in favor, say yes.
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 Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Gotta do the other.
Oh,
I think we're good.
what,
It's all done.
sorry.
We're good.
In theory, you should have said all in favor and all opposed, but everybody said yes, so we're good. We're moving forward.
Now I hear you.
Okay.
Let's see, after the consent calendar.
It's, 6A?
No.
Yeah. 9A, I'm sorry.
There's nothing under item 8, study session, so we're going to item 9, the continued items. The 1700 Ocean Avenue, appeal of the zoning administrator's approval of a minor use permit to allow for the installation of wireless telecommunications facilities with a total of 3 antennas and ancillary antenna equipment located behind 3 10-foot-high rooftop antenna screens enclosures measured from the finished roof surface, each measuring approximately 15 feet by 4 feet in area. Let's see,
Staff report.
yeah. Is there any ex parte? Staff presentation?
Not it. Okay. Good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Likua Vera, Associate Planner at the City of Santa Monica. The item before you is an application for an appeal of the zoning administrator's approval of a minor use permit at 1700 Ocean Avenue to allow a wireless telecommunications facility on the roof of the project site. The location is 1700 Ocean Avenue, fronting Pacific Terrace and Appian Way, and is located in the oceanfront and beach overlay zone districts. There is an existing 8-story hotel on the property, the Regent Santa Monica Hotel, with a parcel size of 116,906 square feet. The aerial photos show the subject property being adjacent to multiple unit dwellings, mixed-use and office buildings, as well as hotels and a parking lot. The site is also near the Santa Monica Beach. And here are some street view photos of the site on Ocean Avenue and along Appian Way, and on Pacific Terrace and Appian Way, as well as on the corner of the site on Ocean Avenue. The minor use permit is for a wireless telecommunications facility operated by T-Mobile for 3 antennas and ancillary antenna equipment. The facility request must meet the findings pursuant to Santa Monica Municipal Code Section 9.32.060B. The facility must be consistent with the general plan, compatible with and relates harmoniously to the surrounding neighborhood, and compliant with all applicable development standards. The proposed facility shall meet all applicable FCC rules and regulations. Lastly, the applicant shall identify and evaluate more preferred locations and potentially less intrusive designs, and provide an analysis that shows that these alternative locations and designs are technically infeasible or not potentially available. The property has an unpermitted 10-foot-high temporary wireless site on the southern corner of the roof along Appian Way, which shall be removed regardless of the application status. The MUP was filed on September 22nd, 2023, to install the proposed wireless telecommunications facility. The city's wireless telecommunications consultant, telecommunication law firm, or TLF, determined that the proposed facility will be in planned compliance with the FCC radio frequency emissions guidelines, so long as the facility meets the conditions of approval as outlined in their first memo. The applicant submitted an updated radio frequency electromagnetic energy compliance report, or an RFEME report, in addition to updated plans and photo simulations. TLF submitted a supplemental memo with more analysis on RF emission safety and confirmed that the proposed facility will be in planned compliance with the FCC guidelines. Okay. The application was originally presented at a ZA hearing on February 13, 2024. One letter in opposition to the MUP request was received. The case was continued by the ZA for the applicant to provide analyses on alternate site location and alternate designs. Hearings on March 12, April 9, and May 14 were continued by the request of the applicant. On June 11, 2024, the MUP was presented to a ZA hearing. One additional letter in opposition to the MUP was received for a total of 2 public comments. On July 30, 2024, the ZA approved the MUP request for the proposed facility. On August 13, 2024, the appellant filed a timely appeal of the ZA's decision. The proposed project is comprised of 3 separate antennas within 3 15 feet by 4 feet enclosures with a height of 10 feet. The ancillary antenna equipment is located behind the antenna sector B and is covered by a 10-foot by 10-foot enclosure, and all antennas are 10 feet away from the roof edge. And provided are the proposed elevations. The facility remains unchanged from its presentation to the zoning administrator. And here is the north elevation along Pacific Terrace, and also the east elevation fronting Ocean Avenue. Here is some more information, including a site plan for each antenna sector, as well as photo simulations, and the last sector here. The appellant's full appeal statement is included in the staff report. The appellant identified the following points of appeal for overturning the ZA's decision. 1, significant visual obstruction from antenna screening enclosures, and 2, safety concerns for residents and employees occupying the surrounding buildings. The appellant states that the facility will have a significant negative visual impact, with antenna sector B as a primary concern. The appellant states that the building will appear taller, with screening enclosures, and will block ocean views for residents and employees at 1733 and 1755 Ocean Avenue. The appellant proposes the following solutions to address this issue: to move antenna sector B behind an existing roof structure to reduce visual impact from buildings along Ocean Avenue, and also for all the antennas to be installed without screening enclosures. The appellant also mentions the existing unpermitted antenna as an example. While there are concerns of enclosure visibility from the upper stories of surrounding buildings, the facility meets the design requirements for concealment from public view and a maximum height projection of 15 feet per section 9.32.080. The appellant proposed solution to relocate antenna sector B behind an existing roof structure would not meet the design standard, as this would be visible from public view along the west elevation on Appian Way. Additionally, removing all screening enclosures would not meet the required design standards, as the antennas are located approximately 10 feet from the roof edge and would be visible from public view. The appellant states that the applicant's RFEME report does not analyze the facility's potential impacts on surrounding buildings where residents and employees occupy. The appellant quotes from this report that the antennas will concentrate towards the horizon with little scattering towards the ground or sky, and the maximum predictive RFEME at the facility would be at 1,891.8% of the FCC's general population limit at the roof level. The report does clarify that the predicted areas with EME over 100% will be remediated with barriers and appropriate signage at the rooftop to designate safety zones below FCC limits and hazardous zones. The report also states that the predictions were determined as if the antennas were operating in full power, though they do not always operate at this capacity. TLF determined that the proposed facility would be in planned compliance with the FCC guidelines if the facility meets the conditions of approval as outlined in their memo. Staff agree with the memo as TLF's review pertains to federal and state guidelines that are outside the city's authority. Furthermore, the ZA determination provides a special condition, condition approval number 20, requiring that the facility is periodically monitored by a qualified expert every 6 months. A technical analysis for each periodic site monitoring shall be submitted to the ZA, showing the facility's compliance with FCC standards and shall be readily available on site for the public. The project was duly noticed to owners and residents within a 750-foot radius and was published in a local newspaper. As of December 4th, 2024, the city has received 9 public comments, 7 of which are in support of the appeal. In addition to the recommended action, the Planning Commission could consider the following with respect to the project if supported by the evidentiary record and consistent with the applicable legal requirements. A1, continue the project for specific reasons consistent with applicable deadlines and with agreement from the applicant. Or A2, articulate revised findings and/or conditions to approve or deny, with or without prejudice, the subject appeal. Okay. In conclusion, staff recommends the Planning Commission deny the appeal 24 ENT-0159 and uphold the ZA's decision to approve the minor use permit application 23 ENT-0164, subject to the conditions of approval. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Have a question?
So I'm basically repeating back what I think you said and to make sure I understood it. So that emission level of 1,891% is actually remediated by the material in the enclosure, and that's what makes it actually not that high where people actually are. Is that correct?
Yeah, TLF, essentially what they do is they require conditions to provide signage to designate what is the hazardous areas that exceed the FCC limits and what are safe areas for walking amongst the rooftop, but it's really just within the rooftop.
So those high numbers don't leave the rooftop, is what you're saying?
According to TLF's
The
analysis,
calculations
yeah.
of the, right. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood. And also, one other thing, if they were assuming they weren't visible from this public right-of-way, if we remove the barriers, that would remove the remediation of the intensity of the waves. Is that right? We need the barriers, the enclosures to protect people from the emissions. Is that correct?
I would say that really TLF is like our city's consultant and would usually conduct that information, but according to their report or memo of that report, They do believe that everything is in good condition and in compliance with the FCC standards.
So you don't know the specific answer to my question? It's not in your wheelhouse?
We typically just defer to TLF's
Okay,
review.
because I just am trying to understand the role of the actual enclosure, if it's more than just aesthetic, if it's functional. That's what but you don't know. Or do you know?
Jim has a question.
Does somebody know?
I have questions, I don't know an answer.
Of course, why would they put them up?
Required for aesthetic.
I have a couple of questions I want to ask. My understanding is the telecommunication company comes in with a report that says this is what the waves are going to be. We have our own consultant that reviews that independently, and that's the TLC group you're talking about, or whatever the,
Yeah,
whatever.
TLF, yes,
Okay,
that's
TLF.
correct.
Can you talk a little bit about, they want monitoring, we're suggesting monitoring every 6 months. Where are we suggesting the monitoring is done?
It'll essentially be reviewing, like, at the rooftop, all of the equipment there to make sure that pretty much all of the frequency is in compliance with federal guidelines. And they would, pretty much this technical consultant or expert would be, like, T-Mobile would have to hire them essentially to come in periodically every 6 months, prepare a report, submit it over to the city, and also have a copy available for the hotel if anybody from the public would like to view it.
So I could walk into the front desk and say, where's the TLF report? And they would be required to produce it.
Yes, that's
So it's a
correct.
publicly available document. They should also come to the city. I guess the question I'm getting, one of the things I'm getting is, we've had one of these before, and it was near a school, and there was concern with the school was going to get these radio waves. And what we were able to do in that case was, we set up a monitoring station at the school so that we could confirm every 6 months that there were not radio waves going in that direction. Has that been something that's been discussed with the applicant or the appellant?
The applicant did request this condition to have an expert come in every 6 months, but as far as for a monitoring station, this wasn't brought up.
Okay. I think those are my questions for right now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I didn't hear that answer, actually.
Yes, the applicant was the one who requested that condition of approval to have an expert come in every 6 months to monitor and test.
No, I understand that, but didn't you ask whether there could be some kind of machine or whatever
monitoring station.
tester?
Well, what I was suggesting, what we did in this other project was we moved a new location. We created a new location at the school site to be testing with
I
the
got
site
it.
to prove to them that there wasn't a concern. And I'm just curious if there's something here we can do with the community to give them comfort.
Is that,
And-
was it like a permanent fixture at the school?
No, I think they go out and, I'm not the expert here at all, but I think they just go out and test with kind of handheld devices
gotcha.
or devices that are not there for permanently.
I got it.
So that, and then what I think I want to key on is the applicant asked for this condition,
Right.
and it hasn't been granted yet.
I guess it's sort of counterintuitive that we require barriers around these cell towers unless they actually serve a purpose. And one would assume the purpose would be to, mitigate, right?
As far as for
Otherwise, why
city
do we
code-
require them?
For city code, it's really based off of design standards. to
Well, it's
have
more than
those-
design. It must have some safety impact.
Well, no, yeah, so it is an aesthetic requirement
I
for,
see.
for screening. But as Liku was indicating, there are conditions here that, have signage and barriers that TLF has recommended to ensure that, like, workers that are on rooftops, are not within sort of, an unsafe zone, right? And that's different than mechanical equipment screening.
Right, okay. But everything they're proposing actually meets code, right?
Correct, yes.
I guess several of the letters talked about how, and I know nothing about any of this, that basically what these things emit could actually fall to the ground or sink through the roof into the building and affect hotel workers. And, is that realistic? Is that a possibility?
I think overall, we don't have, we just have the TLF reports. They've reviewed this and they've determined that the facility that's being proposed is in compliance with the FCC regulations.
I got it.
I just want to be clear that the city is preempted by federal law in that regard. We can't just go make up our own, extra conditions or what
Right.
have you with respect to telecommunications facilities. So we do rely on our experts, of which that is not the staff. That's why we have these third-party
got it.
experts do that review, of these facilities to ensure that, what the applicant is providing in terms of their RF report, and of course, then, TLF, which is the city's consultant, reviews these to ensure that this is in compliance with the FCC regulations.
So what I hear you saying is if this complies with FCC, that pretty much takes away our
Correct, yeah, that
discretion.
is not, it's really out of the city's
I got
purview in
you.
that regard, yeah.
This is a really novice question. How do you know how many cell towers the city needs? I mean, what if everybody comes in and wants a cell tower on their roof? I mean, is there some maximum?
So again, we are preempted by federal law in that regard. Like there's been a lot of, changes recently with respect to that, and it's not a matter of, us placing a cap or whatever, of what's needed. What we do have are findings, with these MEPs that, they're required to show, that have they looked at all these other alternative sites?
Right.
Show sort of other design alternatives. And that was the exercise that the applicant was asked to go through at the ZA hearing, to demonstrate, where did you look? Why is that not meeting your needs, right? And to demonstrate that through their coverage maps and the like. I don't think we have seen an application where, a carrier has asked for something to duplicate coverage they already have. There's a reason they're asking for it.
So
They
there are
wouldn't build-
coverage maps.
Right,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Commissioner Chaco.
Thank you. As it relates to, I think, the first point that the appellant has made regarding protection or obstruction of views, are there any policies or regulations in the city that are applicable to this site that afford protection to views for the property owners adjacent?
In this case, there isn't any.
Thank you.
I'm good right now.
Oh, you, okay.
Thank you very
Let's have the appellate presentation.
Good evening, Commissioners. We request appeal of approval of T-Mobile's permit due to insufficient analysis.
Can you speak a little?
Oh, sorry, yes. Yes, good evening. My name is Duncan Burns, resident of Santa Monica. So I'm here this evening to request appeal of T-Mobile's permit due to insufficient analysis and engagement. The plan to install wireless RF transmitters on top of the new Regent Hotel at 1700 Ocean Avenue poses significant visual, safety, and community impacts. And we request more research and engagement. And the problems we bring up are threefold. Firstly, general public and worker safety concerns related to RF exposure. Secondly, the visual impacts of blocking sight lines both from the beach side and from the street side. And thirdly, the insufficient public engagement and notification. Beginning with the first problem, safety concerns related to RF emissions. The applicant's RF emissions study and the city's review by telecom law firm are inadequate, theoretical in nature only, and fail to account for direct impacts on workers and residents who are living in the path of these emissions. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to show screenshots from within the RF report, and it states that there are extreme levels at roof level, so 1,891% of FCC's general population at the roof level. And so what you're looking at here is the area. On the left side, you see the hotel and one of the proposed antenna locations. And this is the red area is showing the controlled areas. And there has been no consideration given to residents and workers living close by across the street. For example, in the study, in the T-Mobile report, it's only analyzing public safety at a point of interest on the ground for a period of duration of 30 minutes. So to explain what this means, here it is overlaid on the photograph. So your point of interest is there on the ground for passing for 30 minutes. But what about the people that live and work for 24 hours a day in the local area? And we would note also that the energy levels are strongest at roof level from these antennas. It would appear that this theoretical in nature study, it doesn't appear that anyone actually came to the site to study this. It's just from somebody looking at theoretical from a distance. So the study, and again, a screenshot from the report, is based on modeling tools. It's theoretical in nature only. It was also conducted on behalf of T-Mobile, presented in its branded colors, not an independent party. And there are multiple studies presented, and there are inconsistencies there. For the 2023, 378% was then upped to 1,800%. So what else is wrong in this study? Just calling these out. So other weaknesses is the study does not adequately account for the cumulative effects of RF emissions from other infrastructure already installed over time. There's no baseline, it's just, again, in isolation. And where it's also not fully addressing the impacts on residents and workers in nearby buildings that are at the height where the majority of the energy is directed. So the second issue we wish to discuss are the visual impacts, considering the neighboring buildings. The visual analysis was done from the ground level. And here I would just note that to the questions earlier from Commissioner Fresco and others, our understanding is that those screens are purely visual. They are not about blocking workers' access to it. That worker access is from signage and other gates. Is that those large visual mass screens are just intended as a visual thing. So there's quite a lot of bulk to these. These are 3 15 feet by 10 feet solid screens. So it's described to people as a minor use permit, but that's a significant, you see on the right, the block there. You see on the left is the existing temporary equipment that's up there at the present moment, but then we're increasing that to a massive, large block, for example. So this is just showing what that block looks like. And we have proposed that either the screens are not placed on that, if the go-ahead is given to do this, that screens are not placed around these to reduce the visual bulk of them, and they are moved such that they're behind another structure that already exists on the roof, because, for example, in Sector B, this is aimed at the pier, so that being behind some of the structures on the roof would not be in the way of the direction that one is pointing. And the third issue of the three is the community was not adequately informed here. The flyer announces it as a minor use permit. That's kind of vague, given that again, 3 large, bulky items placed on there, and also not not considering the impacts to people who live and work there 24 hours a day. And in the local area, we would also note that T-Mobile, there's a lack of care of signage around existing structures. You may recognize the beach path here with one of these warning signs about this may exceed FCC limits, and people walk up and down past this and park their cars right next to it all the time, and there's a tiny little sign there. So in conclusion, the RF emissions study is flawed. It doesn't adequately account for residents and workers in direct path of these antennas. These are large visually intrusive screens. It'll block sightlines and negatively impact the surrounding community. And public engagement was insufficient, leaving residents and also workers, many of whom come to work in these buildings across the street from it, are not residents and therefore are not notified by this, but they will be the ones working in direct line of this equipment. And also to mention the hotel workers that are working there, standing not for half an hour, but all day long. So what's needed is a cumulative RF exposure analysis so that we understand what this additional facility would add, and a comprehensive analysis of the risks. And so we request that the Planning Commission mandate an independent on-site RF study, not a theoretical one, that accurately reflects the local environment and the horizontal exposures from this equipment that impact residents and workers. We also request that if it is approved to continue, that visual screens would not be used to reduce the bulk. But we request that you give this process more time to properly understand it, as I would say a lot of the discussion here earlier showed that people were unaware of what exactly this equipment was for. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions of the app?
I have one. Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it. I assume you live in one of the buildings right across the street?
I do, yes.
Okay.
And I live and work in the line of sight of one of these.
And do you have a balcony that faces the site?
I don't have a balcony that faces it, but I do have windows that face
Okay.
directly. But there are probably dozens of balconies, both workers and residents, that face these.
Because I'm going to be honest with you, I think our hands are tied. And I think the best we're able to do for you tonight is to provide you guys some testing every 6 months. And what I'm trying to figure out in my head is where would that testing be? So I was asking if you had a balcony to do it on or your rooftop.
There are balconies from many residents. There are balconies from commercial office
Okay,
buildings.
that's fine.
across the street.
That's the question I had for you. We're going to have a discussion about this and staff's going to correct me if I'm wrong, but based on other experiences I've had with these types of sites, we really can only require the testing.
Yeah, it just seems that there's a theoretical in nature study that looked at just this one.
That's why the testing
and
is going to provide
yes.
actual.
And the second request is if it's going ahead, then why the need for the very visually bulky large screens?
Because we have a code that says it's required. And then they would have to refile for a variance to get rid of that. And a variance is very difficult to get.
I would also note that the applicant of they were fine without the screens.
I know, but I'm
So
sure
everyone's fine without the screens.
I'm sure they're fine with it because it doesn't cost them extra money. But it's a city requirement that they hide those type of structures.
But the blanket application of city requirement versus, nuanced looking at each individual case, I think is warranted, right?
That's why they have variance applications. And that's not applied for it right now. So, but thank you for answering my questions.
Are you finished with your presentation?
Yes.
Are there any other questions? Can we hear from the applicant?
Hi, good evening. My name is Katie, and I'm here to speak on this project on behalf of the applicant. I don't have a presentation. I think Liku went through everything perfectly. And yes, in regards to the emissions, I do hear the concerns as well. Unfortunately, for, you know, like, as you said, we are going through the FCC, and we are within the FCC guidelines with everything. This is also, just for some peace of mind for the residents, this is not, like, T-Mobile doesn't do the RF and EME emissions. We have someone, a third party that doesn't, you know, favor any cellular or wireless company. So it is done through a third party to make sure that everything is fair and safe. And we definitely, for the peace of mind, would do the every 6 months testing. We can definitely agree to that as well. Yeah, and in regards to the visual effects of it, we are just, yeah, we are okay either way, with screening or without. We, you know, so that's that on that. And I did just want to say also, within regards to moving antennas, we just can't, we wouldn't want to do that because the way everything is reviewed with our specialists, it's set up in a way to completely cover everything that we need to cover. If we have any antennas moved in any certain ways, it could have coverage gaps, which is shown through the coverage maps and all that. And that would then make another site possible, you know, to be built to cover those new gaps. So the way that the antenna is set up right now and everything is just, everything has been looked at multiple times. We've been working on this project for quite some time, and we would, you know, respectfully like to go forward and have this be built. But I'm here for any questions that you guys may have.
I just want to clarify one thing you said. You guys hire a third party to do your testing, but I just want to make sure it's clear for the public. You give that to the city, and the city then takes your report and has it reviewed by another party,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So it's being reviewed by two outside groups, one being paid for by the city of Santa Monica.
Yes. So yeah. So one being paid for by the city, and then one being paid for by T-Mobile.
Thank you.
So that way everything's fair. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Since there's no public comment, does the applicant have rebuttal? Hello?
I'll let you get the opportunity.
I guess I would ask about the variance question, how that is, whether we can request the variance or.
I'm sorry I brought it up. You cannot ask for it. The applicant could ask for it. It's very expensive. It is the hardest entitlement in the state of California to get approved, a variance. So it's not something people do lightly.
Yeah, so regarding what was mentioned about the reviews, I would just again, the two reviewed by two outside, one paid for by T-Mobile, one by the city. I'll just note that the one paid for by the city is a law firm, and this is a public safety issue. Is it really a public safety? Are they really looking at it from that perspective? And also that the outside review and was theoretical, both of them theoretical in nature. There's no evidence presented that anybody came to study the site and considered, again, I would stress that they took a point of interest that is on the ground passing for 30 minutes, and also workers who are on the rooftop going to the equipment, that's warned, but the bulk of the public who now live and work across from that, especially in the high intensity horizontal lines which line up with buildings, that was not considered in any of the multiple reports or documentation. And there are also hotel workers who work beneath it for way more than 30 minutes. They're standing there in front of the hotel for extended periods of time. So I'll just stress both of those points again. Thank you.
city and the company providing the antennas are going to be testing, that's the best we can do at this point.
And, you know, and then I guess I would also just reiterate the request to not mandate the screening, but the visual screening, which is not there for safety of anybody or anything, just purely visual, which we're pointing out is actually more visible than not. Because there's already equipment there in some smaller amount of equipment that people aren't complaining about the visual effect of.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comments by the commissioners? Can we take a vote?
You discuss, I guess I do have a question for staff.
Okay.
Staff, can we require testing on the roof of this gentleman's building?
Can you repeat the question again?
Can we, as a body, ask that a testing site be set up on their building, whether it's on, I assume on the roof of their building, to do this every 6 months?
Yes, there is an option for you to provide like any additional conditions. Let me pull up my.
Speak up, please.
Yeah, let me pull up my presentation real quick. See if I can probably share it too.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Are you requesting some kind of physical site be established?
Nope.
Just that the testing be not done just on the hotel, but also from this building?
Right. If you remember, I mean, I don't know if you were around back when there was a telecommunications on San Vicente, and the Calthorpe School was concerned about the radio waves. And we were able to establish a testing site, and I don't mean something permanent there. My understanding was that they went out there with equipment on that day and they tested the site. That's all I'm really looking for, yes.
So I think our concern about that is we're sort of, like, that's going to be out of the city's control in terms of demanding whoever controls access to that building, I guess I'll say, right? Like, if any future party or whoever, I mean, I don't know, at this point, like, what if they say, you're not allowed on our roof, we refuse to allow you, then how is the city to enforce that condition?
How about to the extent the property owner allows the testing, we require it every 6 months?
I would think so. I mean,
Yeah, but the problem is I think he's worried that it's gonna come horizontally across into their building.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe we can consider a condition that I think is like the one that's written, but we could augment it with something that says, that if T-Mobile is able to gain, voluntary, if that particular building is willing to voluntarily provide access, that we would also accept reports that occurred on that site, so they have the option. Just because I'm a little concerned about having that as a.
I have a, can I answer something? What if, what about from a balcony of one of his friends?
It's, well, I mean, to be fair, I mean, what if people move, right? I mean, if they don't live there, it's sort
No,
of
but the
hard
point
to
is, it might be
guarantee
easier to
access
access a
on it.
balcony of somebody who's who knows each other.
Right, but it's still private property, right?
Right, okay.
Is it a rental is this rental or condo? Condo. Yeah, I mean,
Is it condominium?
I understand that your concern, staff. I just think that if we could try to phrase it so they are required to at least ask for permission, and if they're denied, then there's nothing you can do. I'm just trying to help out here. I mean, give them a
Yeah,
level.
no, I understand the concept, yeah. I think that would,
I have a question about the question, Commissioner Reese. Since I don't know if any of us are technically qualified to answer this question, but one of the potential concerns I would have of putting a condition like that is, do we know whether testing offsite can actually determine where the source of the waves are coming from, as opposed to if you're on the building and just determining that this antenna is not causing the radiation. So I think that's one concern I would have of putting in a condition that we don't know whether it'll actually provide an answer or not.
I understand. I hear what you're saying, and I do not have that technical expertise. I just based on the experience of these other T-Mobile or the other cellular sites we've worked on here at the commission, they were able to do that. But I don't know that that specific question was, and it's a very good question.
And I can maybe provide some, or at least the intent is to provide some consolation to the residents who have concerns about it. But I just worry that it doesn't give you a clear answer, and it just raises more questions, if you have that data.
Hard to disagree with that. And our third party, they're not here? Our third party reviewer?
As far as the city's consultant,
Yeah.
or
The city's consultants?
the city's consultant is not here. I don't believe they typically come to the hearings. Once they
They've been
prepare
here,
them.
they've been here at the last two hearings yeah.
Yeah, I think in this case, because the issues raised in the appeal were about
Aesthetics.
Aesthetics, but also calling to question essentially the Telecommunications Act, of which the city is fully preempted by federal law. So, there wasn't sort of, we didn't feel there was a need, any further information that our consultant could provide that wasn't in the written reports already.
What about just adding a condition saying that all efforts will be made to do it across the street or, somewhere other than the roof, if that is a feasible way to measure the...
Yeah, but I think Commissioner Chico makes a good point, which is we don't know for a
Right.
fact that they can pinpoint it to that.
Right,
To those radio antennas and not the other 15 in the area.
Right.
I think we should leave it as is.
All right. So somebody make a motion.
Can we take a vote on all of them?
We're going
We need a motion
to
first.
need a motion.
Okay, I'll move that we deny the appeal. I don't have actually the...
Uphold the
What?
zoning, and deny the appeal and uphold the zoning administrators.
Why don't you do it?
I move that we deny
on
the
your-
appeal and uphold the zoning administrator's approval.
Second.
Second.
There we go.
Okay,
We got a first and a second. You could hear that?
Yeah. I just had a first. Is there a second?
Second was Lambert.
Second.
Okay, got it.
Chaco.
Can we have a roll call?
Sorry, no, my bad. That was Chaco.
There are actually 3 recommended actions. Just wanted to confirm that you are moving all 3.
We're doing all
yes,
three.
please.
All 3, okay. Commissioner Chaco,
Aye.
Commissioner Fresco,
Yes.
Commissioner Lambert,
Yes.
Commissioner Reese,
Yes.
and Chair Tolkien.
Yes.
Okay.
The next project, 11A, is a conditional use permit, development review permit waiver, and minor modifications to allow for the construction of a new Tier 2,
Okay.
3-story, 23,634 square foot medical building with mixed-use boulevard zoning district. The proposed waiver and minor modification requests are to allow for a reduction of the minimum upper story setback and loading space dimension requirements respectively. Can we, I guess we also will consider the compliance under the California Environmental Quality Act, including whether the proposed project is exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act. I think, can we have a staff report? Or are there ex parte? Are there any ex parte?
Well, I'm just very familiar with the site because I eat at El Cholo a lot.
I had a phone conversation today at 4 o'clock with Michael Falonis, the architect, about this project, and, just about the variances and why
Commissioner
they were.
Jocko?
I did too. I also visited the site, visited the office of the architect on this project.
I need to add, I've had many email exchanges with Michael Falonis over the past couple days.
Okay, I just want to say that I've had a contact with Stephen Sommer, who's a real estate broker, and I think he works with the developer. And I got a set of plans before this commission hearing and before I saw the staff report.
On December 2nd at 10:30, I met with Stephen Summers, Michael Falonis, and R.L. Sakaris at Mr. Falonis's offices. We discussed the project.
Decades ago, I played a lot of pool there. I will start with that. And then yesterday, I did have a conversation with the applicant and the applicant's representative to just talk about the process, the staff's position on this and how they responded to that.
Staff presentation.
Thank you. Okay, good evening, Commissioners and Chairperson Tolkien. My name is Anna Fernandez. I'm the Associate Planner and the Case Planner for this project. The item before you tonight is a development review permit for a commercial property at 1901 Wilshire Boulevard. The proposed project is seeking 4 entitlements. A DRP is required because it exceeds the Tier 1 thresholds for the mixed-use boulevard zone, and because the new construction exceeds 15,000 square feet. A waiver is required to reduce the upper story step-back requirement on the street-facing elevations. A minor modification to reduce the minimum clearance height of the loading space by 2 feet, and a conditional use permit to allow the medical office use in the MUB district. The site is at the northeast corner of Wilshire Boulevard and 19th Street. It was formerly occupied by a billiard hall. The parcel to the rear is highlighted to show an existing surface parking lot that will be redesigned as part of this project, and it is zoned R2. This stretch of Wilshire Boulevard is zoned MUB, and it's developed primarily with 1-story commercial buildings. And a 2-story medical office building is located on 19th Street across the street on 19th Street. These are images of the neighborhood at the intersection of Wilshire Boulevard and 19th Street. You can see the project site in the upper left corner and in the lower right corner. For some background, a conditional use permit application was submitted back in September of 2022 to establish the medical office use. At that time, the project consisted of really just redeveloping the existing building and removing some illegally built additions in the rear. Prior to the hearing, the applicant requested the postponement of the project to redesign it. Since then, in August 2023, the scope of the project grew substantially and required a development review permit, and that's when we received that application in conjunction with the waiver application requesting to waive the upper story step-back requirement. When staff reviewed the applications, we found that it would also require a minor modification request due to the loading space dimensions. We received that minor modification application in February of this year, and subsequently the ARB reviewed and approved the project in September. So again, this is a rendering of the project. It's a Tier 2 building with 3 stories. The maximum height for a Tier 2 project is 45 feet. This project is proposing 42 feet and 1.5 inches. Its primary use will be a medical office, and the size is 23,634 feet, taking advantage of the full 2.25 FAR that's afforded to it. Again, although parking isn't required for the site, it is provided in the adjacent parking lot across the alley, and it will consist of 22 parking spaces, and 15 bicycle parking spaces are on the ground floor of the building. This is a rendering of the project which was approved and reviewed without comment on September 16th by the ARB. It was approved under consent. The site plan here shows the two parcels perpendicular to each other. The subject site contains the medical office building and will be supported by the parking. There are two entrances to the building. The lobby entrance to the medical office is on 19th Street, and a secondary entrance for the personal training use will be located on Wilshire Boulevard. The utilities and storage space for the building is on the ground floor at the rear. The personal training use fronting on Wilshire Boulevard satisfies the active use requirement required for the MUB zone. The remainder of the building is for the medical office use. The loading space, which is the subject of the minor modification, is shown here, and I'll be discussing that later. This is the second floor plan of the building. You can see that the lobby is open to below in the bottom portion of the image, and it's the central organizing feature of the use. It's the third floor. Again, we see the lobby, and there is an outdoor deck in the bottom corner. It connects to a staff conference room. Moving on to the elevations, this is the front elevation facing Wilshire Boulevard. This is the rear that faces the alley, and in the center there you can see the entrance to the ground floor. And this is the, in the upper corner you'll see the interior side elevation, and below is the west elevation that you would see on 19th Street. So moving into the requests here, the first one is a waiver. They're requesting a waiver. In order to approve the waiver, the Planning Commission has to make the required findings. They're paraphrased here. I've bolded finding D because this is the one that staff feels we cannot meet. The applicant is requesting to waive the upper story step back requirement, which is an average of 5 feet on each street side elevation on each floor. Along Wilshire Boulevard, the project proposes no step back on the second floor, but it does meet the requirement on the third floor. On 19th Street, the project proposes an average of 0.7 feet on both floors. Staff recommends denial of this request as the project cannot meet finding D related to the existing site conditions. The project will demolish all of the existing improvements. There are 2 SoCal Edison poles at the rear of the building, which the applicant asserts will require a 10-foot setback. However, the proposed project does not show that setback in any of the designs. So this means that it will require to be further reduced at each floor along the rear to do that. The orange area that you see in the images on the plans are the visual step back that the applicant is asking the commission to consider. It's the internal lobby that's enclosed by the glass wall. Glass walls and fenestration are not considered a substitution for actual reduction in massing, and so due to the inability to meet the finding for the existing conditions, staff recommends denial of this request. The project is also requesting a minor modification. In order to approve that, as the Planning Commission also has to make the findings as summarized on this slide. I've highlighted finding A, which we feel that we cannot make. The minor modification requests to reduce the vertical clearance height of the loading space from 14 feet to 12 feet. The image in the upper right is the portion of the ground floor which shows the length and width of the loading space, and those are code compliant. The section below shows the 12-foot clearance into the ground floor of the building. The Mobility Division was consulted on this project and found the clearance height to be sufficient. However, staff recommends denial based on the inability to meet finding A related to the existing site conditions. Again, the parcel is relatively flat and the project will demolish all of the existing improvements. The applicant also states that complying with the 14-foot height clearance in conjunction with the existing topography of the site would create a disproportionately tall ground floor at 18.5 feet high. whereas the other floors are about 13 feet high. However, the parcel, again, is considered relatively flat. It has a grade difference of 1.5 feet on Wilshire Boulevard, which is 70 feet, and 3 feet along 19th Street, which is 150 feet. Calculating that grade difference is 2%, which for context is the required slope of a sidewalk to drain. The desire to have the proportionate plate heights is understandable. However, the project has not fully explored its design options, such as increasing the overall height, again to the 45 maximum height that's provided under the Tier 2 limits in order to address those concerns. The third entitlement for the project is a development review permit. We see the findings here, paraphrased. The full list of the findings is in the staff report. Finding A and D are not able to be supported by the applicant's project. The development review permit is required to be consistent with the applicable standards of the zone. And as the project requires the approval of the minor modification and the waivers in order to accomplish this compliance, these findings cannot be made because we're recommending denial of those two entitlements as well. And the fourth and final entitlement request is for a conditional use permit to allow the establishment of the medical office in the MUB zone. In order to approve the CUP, these are the findings that the commission would have to make. I've highlighted here finding F regarding the physical location of the use. The project's ability to make the finding that it is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood depends upon the physical location and the placement of the use itself, which in turn depends upon the approval of the development review permit. Since staff is recommending denial of the development review permit, it follows that we also have to recommend denial of the CUP. The item was properly noticed, and we received one letter of support. And again, the project actually is exempt from CEQA because it does not apply to any project where a public agency is rejecting or disapproving it. Staff recommends that the commission adopt the findings that CEQA does not apply to this project, deny the waiver, deny the minor modification, deny the development review permit, deny the conditional use permit, and adopt the statement of official action. And with that, I conclude, and I'm available for any questions.
Questions?
Chair.
Chair, can I ask some questions?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a few questions, and I'm really trying to understand how you arrived at certain conclusions. So let's start with the waiver, because I think that one comes up first. Right. Okay. So I'm curious in the context of the ARB process. How does staff think about ARB approval relative to judgments about architecture?
Good.
Well,
because you're making claims about architecture in the staff report, and the ARB didn't even hold a hearing on this. They simply approved it as submitted, and I'm trying to understand, are there where are the places, when have you disagreed with the ARB, and on what basis have you disagreed with the ARB? When was the last time that the ARB approved something and staff turned around and said, nope, architecturally, this is terrible?
So I did, thank you for bringing this up. I did not mention that procedurally, the way this the project has evolved, because they applied for the DRP, the development review permit process requires that it be heard by the Architectural Review Board before it's heard by the Planning Commission.
Right.
If the ARB had made any modifications to the building design in terms of its mass, we did notify and had extensive conversations with the applicant to make them aware of that procedural, of that process, to let them know that if any substantial changes happen to the building, they would have to redesign it, and then we would basically start the process over. So before the design has come to this body, the ARB's purview was really on the design. It did not have any of the context of the entitlements that were required. So that's why staff has not disagreed with the ARB's decision on it. It really is completely separate from the entitlements that are tied to it.
But if I, as a planning commissioner, wanted to say, I can make finding D because the ARB has endorsed the design, and far be it from me to substitute my judgment for that of the actual design body, and I think it is justified by the architecture, how would that be a problem? That's why I'm looking for places where staff thinks that we're actually obligated to make architecture-related findings that counter the ARB, because that's part of what you're arguing here, is that we can't make finding D. So I'm trying to understand the basis for that argument.
So if I may just hop in
Yeah.
quickly, and then planning staff can take over. I think one just kind of baseline is that a waiver is a waiver from code, which is this body's purview. Code is not the purview of the ARB. Right? Compliance
Okay.
with the zoning ordinance is not the purview of the ARB. So the ARB does not review and approve based on compliance with code, but this body does. So the waiver is a request for a waiver from code, from the planning code, rather than architectural design, which is the
course.
ARB's purview.
So but I'm going to read the sentence. I'm going to remove some words, but I'm going to read D. The approval of the requested modification is justified by architecture.
Right.
If I feel like I can make that finding and said, well, how could you possibly make that finding? And I say, well, the ARB agreed with me. Is there some other reason on the basis of architecture that I have to make the opposite finding?
No, yeah, I think said a different way. So again, the ARB's purview is looking at simply the project design, the thing that's presented to them,
Okay.
right? And they don't, while staff makes every effort to ensure that what's brought to the ARB is at least has an initial code check, so we're not bringing
Yeah.
something grossly out of compliance, and they're
Yeah.
looking at a building that, doesn't meet the code at all. In this case, it was close enough, and as Anna indicated, the applicant was informed, right, that if the ARB made design modifications, it might change your request to amend, to make modifications from a technically code-compliant project. So again, the waiver, the waiver and the major modification, two things, like one's the loading space and then one's these upper-level step backs. These are development standards in the zoning code, and so the ARB had no purview to grant that. Now,
Of course not.
certainly,
We know
the
that.
commission does not have to, I think your question is this, you don't have to agree with our recommendation. If you feel that you can make findings in the affirmative, you would need to state what those are on the record to make a different conclusion, than staff is recommending.
Okay, that's helpful. Next, under the waiver, there is this comment about Edison and the imposed 10-foot setback. Did the applicant communicate with staff its belief? I mean, there are two things here, and I want to understand how we got this paragraph, because did the applicant communicate with staff its belief that the lines would be buried, and therefore the 10-foot setback would no longer apply? And if so, wouldn't the burden be on the applicant to ensure that the lines were buried, because otherwise they'd never be able to pull a permit?
They did not communicate that with.
They did not communicate that to you. Okay. So if we were now made aware that they believed that those lines were going to be buried, we could make a judgment on that paragraph based on the information provided to us, right? They would never get the building, they would never get the permit for a building that didn't meet the setback requirement. So if they're coming for approval on a building without the setback requirement, presumably they have an extremely high level of confidence that those lines are going to be buried. Is that fair?
I think that's fair, yeah.
Okay. And then my last question is about this question. I mean, we probably people have, we can disagree about whether that slope is sufficiently significant as to justify the changes, or, you know, whether it's the waiver or the modification, but primarily the minor modification. I understand that. I might land in a different place, but I want to ask two specific questions. One of which comes from Deja Vu about the project we did on Ocean, exactly. You have the same deja vu, which my understanding is that part of the reason for this particular floor plate is because those two entrances are at the same, they're at the same height. They're the places where the slope works. If the floor plate were to be moved, the only available solution would be the introduction of extremely bulky ramps in order to make those entrances ADA compliant. And so my first question is whether staff has a view, both architecturally and in terms of massing and sidewalk impingement, about the relative value of those ramps. In other words, do you feel that we as the Planning Commission ought to force them to have a different floor plate, knowing that it's going to create these weird ramps? You might say yes, but I'm just curious.
They might not think they're weird either.
Right, that's what I'm saying. They might think the ramps are a better solution.
So yeah, I think we've definitely discussed the ramps, and I think one thing that the mobility division considered on this was that the ramp actually that's shown here, it actually will have to be raised, I think, even 6 inches higher, if I'm remembering correct from.
I'm not talking about the loading ramp. I'm talking about ramps to the entrances on 19th and Wilshire.
Oh.
I'm
for
talking about
pedestrians.
ADA ramps.
Yeah. I don't think that would have any effect on the loading space dimension, and the
I'm not-
floor plate height would not be affected by that.
Well, because they could get the 14 feet by excavating more, right? But then they wouldn't have the same access points.
Right. I
On
mean,
the street.
they're fully grading the site as part of the project.
Okay. And then my last question really goes back to mobility, which is, mobility seemed to think that this was fine. So is it a code issue, or is there some other?
So there's two things happening here. We do consult with the mobility division because we have to be sure that it's not going to result in a loss of a parking space, the loading space. They assured staff that it wouldn't, that it's possible to have a 12-foot high clearance and that it can still work. But the other part of this, and more importantly, is that we have to be able to make the finding. And given the site characteristics and the rest of the findings that we're required to make, we couldn't make any of them, given that the site will be completely graded. It doesn't have any existing landmarks or historical conditions. It's going to be essentially brand new. And so given the slope not being as extreme as the applicant felt that it is, we just felt that we could not make the finding in good faith.
Okay. And then, I'm sorry, did you, in the conversation with mobility, this is one of those situations, we dealt with this on Ocean Park last year with 2 childcare sites next to a residential neighborhood. Was there any conversation about the alley and traffic flow, given that there is, I mean, it's not coming to us, but there's a big residential project happening right next door Was there any consideration of traffic flow? There were letters, there have been letters on that project related to concerns about alleyway blocking, so I'm just curious if there'd been any conversation.
No.
Okay, all right, thank you so much.
I have one quick question. Back to slope. It's deafening. Back to slope. The applicant actually measured slope vertically.
Yeah. They actually measured it diagonally across.
Yeah, I know
the
you did
parcel.
it on the perimeter. Is one method better than another? Because theirs actually justifies the 12 feet versus 14 feet.
Right, so the way they did the slope, it was diagonally from corner to corner.
That's what I'm saying,
And there
right.
is a larger grade difference doing it that way.
Right.
Staff did it
That's my question. I mean, is there
Yes, I
something
guess
illegitimate about what they
It would be more
did?
advantageous, the slope is larger when you're considering it over, or the differential is higher from corner to corner.
I understand that. And that's how they came up with the 12 feet. Is there something illegitimate about doing that?
That's not how the.
That's just not the way it's
That's
calculated.
not how you're supposed to measure it per the code.
The slope is always measured rise over run in a vertical.
On the perimeter. You guys did the streets, 19th and Wilshire. He did vertically.
Site as a whole.
Side as well.
We dealt with this on Ocean Avenue.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's discuss it when it's discussion time.
Okay, I just wanted to know how the city came up with something different from the applicant and whether that makes sense.
What do we hear from the applicant?
I just want to highlight, in that discussion, let's ask more questions when we get to maybe now's the time. Tell us how it's supposed to be met, and talk to me again about how it's supposed to be measured per code, because what I'm hearing is you guys did it per code, they did it what's most advantageous.
So grade is always measured rise over run. It's just the grade differential over the span of the distance. So actually, the way they did it across the diagonal distance, it's still 2%. So because it's a longer distance, and even if it is 12 feet, the longer distance that differential occurs over is still only a 2% grade difference. So I think in the applicant's letters, they're harping on, or focusing on the 12 feet as the grade difference. But when you're actually measuring slope to see if a site is flat or steep, however you want to say that, that is always measured by percentage. And so that percentage, the reason I included that in the presentation is just to give you some context that 2% is the slope of a sidewalk, which is what most people would consider flat.
Right, and I find that a compelling piece of information, but even more compelling is that it's 2% either way you measure it.
Either way, it's 2%.
Can I just follow up on that? What's the slope of the alley?
Oh, I did not measure the alley.
Well, the parcel has 4 sides. And I understand that you're measuring the slope from 19th Street along Wilshire. I understand that you're measuring slope from Wilshire up 19th Street, but that's only 2 sides of a parcel. And in order to have a parcel, you need to have 4 sides.
I would imagine it's very similar to the 2% that's along Wilshire Boulevard, because it really isn't that much different along one edge to another.
I think we should look at, because you could have a very different height at the back.
Well, the applicant.
I mean, somebody should talk about that, because there could be a very different height at the back of the project. Okay.
Commissioner Schrago.
Thank you.
I have a question just for clarification from staff to make sure I understand. So the scope of our ability to approve the waiver and the minor modification is that it has to be based on a unique condition of the site, and that's the only basis on which it can be done. Did I understand that right?
Yeah, I mean, there's several findings, for, as Anna indicated, so 943-100 is waivers, 943-090 is minor modifications, and, there are several findings, but a key one, and it's similar in both, is the approval of the requested modification or the waiver is justified by environmental features, site conditions, location of existing improvements, architecture or sustainability considerations, or retention of historic features or mature trees.
Is staff saying it's not compliant with that?
Right, our recommendation includes like analysis of that and not being able to make that finding. Largely, because this is brand new construction, there's always a way to design to meet the code.
So I can
Can
go
I-
ahead and provide that figure if you like.
I want to follow up on that question, though, because that is clearly why you guys are saying it doesn't work, because the site doesn't have special circumstances. And this gets back to the variant, in my world, that's the key problem with a variance finding, why you want to stay from variances. I don't read that in here. I say that I read it as that's one of the considerations is site constraints. But it clearly gives me this other option of architecture. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right, is I get all of these things to choose from, which is environmental features, site conditions, locations of existing improvements, architecture, sustainability considerations, or retention of historic features. Hysteric, sorry. Again, I think you guys are parsing the words a little bit differently in this situation. It's not a variance finding where it needs special circumstances on the site.
I have a follow-up question. Is it possible for us to see those listed up on screen somewhere, the actual requirements that you just read out, Commissioner Reese? They are.
Can we hear from the applicant? May we hear from the applicant? Because I have
let's-
observations that aren't appropriate for questions.
Let's
that
hear
are
from the applicant.
burning.
Here. Just stand there and hold it.
There's a.
There you go.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Stephen Summers with Crest Real Estate, land use consultants working on behalf of the applicant for the project. We've also got Michael Falonis and Anahit Asatrian of Michael Falonis Architects here with us today to help answer any questions. We really appreciate your time this evening, and planning staff appreciate your time as well, although we do respectfully disagree in this instance. Definitely appreciate all of your work leading up to this point. So the project at 1901 Wilshire Boulevard is a project that I think is going to be, really a great benefit to the community once it's built in terms of jobs provided, services provided as a personal training facility and an orthopedics center for both clinic and surgery, and also architecturally. I think it's a really beautiful contemporary project that really adds a lot to this corner. I'm going to breeze through some of the project description items because staff already presented on that, but I do just want to reiterate that the project was, as you know, approved unanimously by the ARB at the September 16th hearing of this year, and that is relevant to the architectural considerations finding. Of course, they're not the ones that ultimately approve the waiver, but I think that their determination on the aesthetics of the building is very relevant to this discussion. I also want to note that this is a project where we've not been made aware of any neighborhood opposition. There's a support letter in the file, and we actually proactively decided to meet with the Santa Monica Mid-City Neighbors Association and presented to them. They were very happy to hear from us and had no opposition to the project either. So I think this is a project that the community is comfortable with. Again, the project site is at the northeast corner of 19th and Wilshire. I'm going to go quickly through this and the floor plans because you've already seen these. The parking plan that's close up on this screen here, it is voluntary parking because the site is subject to AB 2097, the state law waiving parking requirements. But I want to note that the loading zone has been placed in a way where it's directly across from one of the entrances to that parking lot, just in case, let's say, a second vehicle comes, realizes that there is already a truck in the loading zone area. They're able to pull into that parking lot to get out of the alley. So I think that's a really intelligent design by the architects to place it there, which did ultimately push the loading zone entrance a little bit further in that direction, and the grade differential is more extreme from one corner of the site to the other, as I'll get to. So the entitlement requests, you all are familiar with what those are, so I'm going to jump into the waiver, which really the waiver and the minor modification are, I think, the two items that staff has raised questions about. So the waiver from the minimum upper story step backs. There's two facades here, of course, so I'm going to go one at a time. The requirement per code is that there's an average of a 5-foot step back on each floor above the second floor of the building. So on the Wilshire frontage, that would be an average of 350 square feet per floor. The architects came to us when they had put together this original design, and they said, look, when you make these layer cake buildings that sort of comply with the code, the letter of the law, you ultimately receive these balconies that are maybe 5 feet deep that they aren't actually usable for the occupants of the building, and they don't provide real beneficial articulation from the street facade either. And so what the architect came up with is they put the upper story deck that you see on the third floor at the corner of the building where it's most visible, and actually visible from both Wilshire and 19th, so it provides relief on both frontages, and that is 750 square feet of articulation. So instead of 350 square feet at the second and third floor, 700 square feet total, they've provided 750 square feet, but it's all just consolidated on the third floor of the building. And given that this is only a 3-story building, it seems reasonable to consolidate that on one of the levels, and it does have a real architectural impact. Additionally, on the Wilshire facade, there is the use of this translucent screen at the center of the building that lets light out, and then the glass at the ground floor, which just further articulates this building. And I think ultimately what's been achieved here is the intent of the code of the step back regulations has been satisfied, at least in my opinion. And that is really architectural consideration being given to this project to provide functionality and benefit aesthetically from the exterior of the building. Now we'll transition to the 19th Street facade. Again, I want to reiterate, the step back on the third story, that deck, it's visible from both facades. So although we don't get credit for it on the 19th, it's been placed in a way to help the articulation from both sides when you're looking at the building. But the big move on the 19th Street facade is right around the middle of the building, you can see this glass enclosed atrium or lobby. That's where the internal staircase is for the building, and it doesn't technically count for the step back per the letter of the law because of the glazing on the exterior, but that glazing is transparent, and so visually you are able to see through not just the second and third floors, which is what the step back would require, but actually all 3 levels. So there's really a full carve out visually in the center of this facade along Wilshire. And so again, I think there's been a very intelligent architectural move that's being made by the Michael Falonis team to create this transparency that again meets the intent of the step back law when you're looking at massing of the building. I also want to note that Michael's really educated me on there's an environmental or sustainability benefit of the sort of 3-story chimney design or atrium design where it can help to exhaust warm air on hotter days. So they'll have a large fan that's intended to be used at least in part for fires and getting smoke out of the building. But also on warmer days, it's able to clear out the air within that atrium space to help to cool the building without excessive energy being utilized. This exhibit just shows the size of the step back at the corner at the 750 square feet, as I mentioned. And then what I hadn't mentioned yet on 19th Street is the lobby and atrium plus the small step back in front of it is 923 square feet at the first floor, second floor, and third floor. The code required average step back is 750 square feet just at the second and third floors. So visually, I feel that we are providing actually more than what the code would otherwise require. 923 square feet on each of the 3 floors rather than 750 on the second and third. And lastly, here is the waiver finding D put up on the screen. And respectfully, it is quite different than what was up on the screen earlier. It states the approval of the requested modification is justified by environmental features, site conditions, location of existing improvements, architecture or sustainability considerations, or retention of historic features or mature trees. So this is an or statement. Really, to make this finding, one of these needs to be justified or satisfied. And I feel strongly, our whole team feels very strongly that we've demonstrated the architecture and sustainability considerations through the larger deck on the third floor of this building, which is a consolidated setback, and the large glass atrium at the middle of the 19th facade, which also has an environmental or sustainability benefit to it as well. Moving on to the minor modification request. As shown in this diagram, there is a 6-foot height difference or elevation change from one corner of the building to the other corner of the building. And I don't actually believe that the percentage of grade change is really what's relevant here. It's the number of feet of grade change, because ultimately the first floor of this building is established at the Wilshire frontage. And that is typically carried throughout a building, unless you're going to have large ramps, one way or another getting into a building. The alley elevation is also fixed, right? We're not going to significantly lower the alley. That's a much larger project affecting other parcels. And so it's because of that 6-foot grade change that we are requesting the reduction from 14 feet to 12 feet in height for our loading zone. It's really due to no other consideration other than that very specific site condition. Now, I do want to note that along with the mobility division having confirmed that 12 feet is sufficient for the operations of the building, our client, who has multiple other orthopedic clinics throughout greater Los Angeles, has confirmed that his kind of day-to-day deliveries are typical, Amazon trucks, UPS trucks, boxes. Larger scale equipment is all in the building when it gets put in the building while it's being built. So their day-to-day deliveries, he has confirmed absolutely would be comfortable getting into, a 12-foot loading height. A typical Amazon delivery, van, they're like 9.5 feet tall. So 12 feet is ample. And I think that's why ultimately the mobility division came out with the position that they did. This is an image of the mobility division's comment where they said that the 12 feet is sufficient. And I already talked about the typical delivery trucks. I just want to clarify, 14 feet, the difference between 12 to 14 feet, going up to 14 feet means an 18-wheeler truck could theoretically fit through the entrance. But practically speaking, an 18-wheeler truck is not coming into this alley. So this isn't a realistic consideration. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier is, shoot, I had it, I missed it, I'll come back to it. But I do want to add a voluntary condition for your consideration, which is that we're totally comfortable adding a condition stating that a minimum of 2 no stopping anytime signs shall be placed along the rear alley facade of the proposed building. That's just to kind of further benefit the community, because I know there are often concerns about delivery trucks idling. We're also comfortable adding a voluntary condition stating that to the extent that there are valet operators employed on the premises, that they be educated or trained on the loading zone operations and advised to direct delivery vehicles to the loading zone space on site, again, to just stop there from being a logjam in that alley. We can't condition that there will always be valet just because of AB 2097, so that's why I gave that specific language there. Lastly, even with the 12-foot height clearance, the loading space requirement creates an excessive ground floor height of 17.5 feet on the first floor. That is specifically because we have this Wilshire elevation and the alley elevation. And to get 12 feet above Wilshire, we have to go up to 17.5 feet to the second floor. And I understand the staff report, it's mentioned that we could simply raise the height of the entire building to add 2 more feet to that ground floor level, but respectfully, it's not practical. It would increase cost of the building. It would increase material resources, therefore being an environmental or sustainability negative. And it would increase massing of the building. So it would be a negative from an aesthetics perspective, all for an extra 2 feet that isn't actually useful, because those types of trucks can't access the building. So that being said, minor mod finding A, which is the one that staff has raised concerns with in this case, states that the approval of the minor modification is justified by site conditions, location of existing improvements, architecture or sustainability considerations, or retention of historic features or mature trees. There's a clear site condition, the 6-foot grade change from one corner of the property to the back at the rear, that is driving this change. Along with the fact, I remembered what I wanted to say earlier, that code mandates that we access the loading zone space from the alley. So it's not as if we're deciding to put the loading zone space from the alley when we don't have to do that. It has to be on that side of the property where the grade change is most significant, and thus, because of the length of the site, we need to reduce the loading zone to avoid having a kind of absurdly tall first floor of the building. So I do believe that there are site conditions which then lead to architectural considerations that really do justify making finding A for the minor modification. So all that being said, really appreciate all of your time listening. We're here to answer any questions and respectfully request that you decide to ultimately approve the project. Thank you.
Question. Thank you, Mr. Summers. Did you or Mr. Falonis get the slope along the other two sidelines? So, because to get to 6 feet from the corner of Wilshire and 19th, 1.5 feet or 2 feet doesn't add up to 6. So I'm just wondering what's happening on the back corner of the property.
We have the survey here.
Yeah, it'd be helpful to know what the slopes are around the whole property.
Yep.
Maybe give us a moment and we can come back to that.
Of course.
If anyone else has
for
other
sure.
questions, great.
I just wanted to get that in the record for us, yeah.
So not from one corner of the site to the other. I think that's from along the alley. It's a roughly 4.2 or 4.3% slope. But what I would say on that is, I don't know that the percentage of grade change is actually what is entirely, or what is the key here. It's really the number of feet of grade change, just because it's a long site.
No disagreement, but we've heard an argument that 2% is sidewalk grade. And so hearing that something is 4.2%, that is a lot more than 2%. And so I think it's going to be a matter of discussion, but that's why I wanted to understand what because it's a 4-sided parcel, not a 2-sided one.
Right.
But it's the alley height that's really the operative, right?
It's the alley height that's driving this whole conversation.
That's right.
It's not the street height. Yeah.
That's right. It's the alley side that's driving the elevation change. And you have to take Michael Falonis Architects, you have to take into consideration not just the slope on Wilshire Boulevard, which is 2%, no argument there.
Right.
And 2% on 19th Street, no argument there. But that doesn't tell you, if you're trying to set an elevation for the finished floor of that building, what you need to do is you need to daylight on two sides. You need to daylight so you get a clear entrance on Wilshire and a clear entrance on 19th Street. And it doesn't take into consideration that corner. It doesn't take into consideration the corner, the northeast corner at the alley. And that's where the problem exists. If we were to raise the building up another 2 feet, now we've got 17 and a half feet floor to floor on Wilshire Boulevard. That's the story height. If we raise it another 2 feet, now we're 19 feet. I don't think this commission or ARB has probably ever seen a first story at 17 or 19 feet high in the last 10 years. So what we're doing is we're adding another whole chunk of building just to get clearance for a driveway into a loading area, which is designed, the loading area in the code is designed for 18-wheelers. That's 14 feet tall. FedEx and all the other trucks are about 9.5 feet tall.
It's taking forever because we're going.
Nina, you have a question?
No, I would like to start discussion.
Public comment.
Oh, we have comments, okay. I just, yeah.
I have one question. I'm sorry, Nina. I'm going to ask.
Do you have any
No,
questions?
this one is not the same, but it is the same.
I can't look.
Are you really going to plant palm trees along 19th Street, or those are what existing?
Those are existing.
Are they planned to stay?
Absolutely. You wouldn't touch them. Where's Jerry?
It's not even a tree.
Jerry would be all over.
It's
me
a
if we
weed.
started messing with it.
Please consider doing something. I don't know that you have the ability to, but,
We don't.
right, that's what I'm afraid. See?
Grass, another stick of grass.
So the question is whether we're ready for discussion.
We have a public comment.
We have one public comment, Jerry Rubin. Jerry?
Does Jerry like palm trees?
A tree is a palm tree. A palm tree is a grass. I learned that from Jim.
Yeah, thanks again. Before I give my unprofessional viewpoint, I would like to make a disclosure. Michael Falonis, a few years ago, posted a picture of himself hugging a tree in France on our Tree Hugging Friends Facebook page.
Was Paris.
Friend forever.
Yeah.
Jerry, I think that's a conflict of interest.
It's open to the public, people. It's actually a beautiful, he couldn't be at our tree hugging day event, so he posted that picture because he was in France. And I always felt for many years that Michael Falonis is one of the best architects in Santa Monica, and I'm sure you all understand the great contributions he's made. I think all of the questions that I might have had I been sitting where you are, and with all respect to the city staff, I think there is reason to approve this. I think this looks better and is more beneficial than if there were a setback. So it's just something to think about. And I know you can't emphasize this, but for me, especially I've been running around to a lot of medical offices recently, to have a medical facility like this that looks so good and is so needed right now for people, seniors, everybody. This is something we should approve unanimously and get started with. It really looks great. It's friendly in so many ways, and it's only 3 stories tall. My gosh. That, to me, I don't even understand, and I don't want to start a thing about opening up a whole ball of wax about whether setbacks are really needed or what that all came about for. But if something's designed really nicely, and people would do that, then what's the point in doing it? I don't want you to have to revisit the law, but you have the ability, as it was just said, to say that we're approving it anyhow because it's justified. And I hope you do that. Thank you.
Should we take a break?
Does the applicant have any more comments to make?
this light off?
I don't know how, so I'm not gonna touch it.
Blinding.
I was simply going to acknowledge Mr. Rubin. I've seen you at many hearings, and you bring a great dose of positivity and levity to these meetings, and I think it's really a welcome thing at these public forums to have that. So thank you, and happy birthday.
I know staff has a tough job, and I appreciate all the time and effort and energy staff's put into it. Jing and Anna and David, I wish you all the very best.
Michael, can you talk a little bit more about the sustainable value of that atrium on 19th Street?
Yes.
A little more color on that, please.
Yeah, we did the same thing at the 16th Street Outpatient Surgery and Oncology Center that's across the street from the hospital. It's a little bit bigger. It's 45 feet wide, 45 feet deep, and it's roughly about 45 feet tall. The space that we're using here now, and the dimensions of that space is wider than this council chambers. It's 3 times taller than this council chambers, and it's half as deep as this council chambers. Those spaces, and this is facing south and west, get warm in the summer. We use a very, very old idea of using the space as a chimney to allow it to self-ventilate. We did it on 16th Street, and it works. And it's simple. Open a couple of windows, and the automatic doors are going to be opening and closing often, going into the space. We've got 2 windows that are going to operate, that are manually operated. We have a fan required by code, which exhausts smoke from a fire, and all we have to do is turn that on, open those 2 windows, and we can self-ventilate. We do not need to mechanically condition the space. So the amount of energy that's being saved in just this simple operation is something that we strive to do, is to make these buildings more sustainable.
I have one question for you, Michael.
Yes.
Did you ever get the parking to work on the 16th Street?
We'll talk about that at a later time.
I have a question for the applicant.
Go ahead.
There's one item noted in the staff report that hasn't been elaborated on. I just wanted to ask that question regarding the 10-foot setback required from existing power lines. So could you speak to that? And I also wanted to get a clarification from staff on it.
So the intent is for the power lines to be undergrounded along the alley, and it is understood that in order to obtain building permits for this project, SoCal Edison will have to, grant consent and authorization to the city, confirming that that is going to occur. Otherwise, the design as presented would have to be modified. So it's understood by the applicant that for this version of the design, without the 10-foot setback, that the undergrounding would be necessary.
I'm going to add one additional thing. Oddly enough, the pole that's in the center of the rear of our property is listing, once we get to the 3rd floor, it's listing about 2 feet into the building. So Edison's going to have to do something with that pole, because that's an unacceptable condition. And it would affect the 3rd floor of the building in the rear, because it's the power lines that you need the 10-foot clearance.
A follow-up question on that for staff. So would I be understanding right that if those power lines are undergrounded, that 10-foot setback would then go away? And would the undergrounding of the power lines be a condition of approval, or how would that work?
So as a standing requirement, there actually is, that's in Public Works Code, is the undergrounding of utilities. Oftentimes, I think we hear from applicants, it's cost prohibitive. So that isn't required. And then there is a certain setback. I'm not certain if it's 10 feet. I feel there is a setback requirement from existing electrical lines. As indicated, I think that information here is actually news to us. The applicant had not communicated this previously to staff, that their intent was to underground the power lines. They actually communicated to us that one of the reasons for the waiver was that 10-foot setback would be required, which was not reflected on the plans. And that's one of the questions that we had, was, it wasn't shown on the plans. There was no indication of the undergrounding of utilities, wasn't communicated to staff. And so that was a reasoning provided, that they needed, essentially the space from the waiver to make up the loss of the setback, I guess, from off the alley.
Could I make a quick comment about that? It wasn't that we were hiding anything from staff.
No, that's not what's being suggested.
But it sounds like that's what's being suggested. What we did was, our client talked to the neighbor to the east, because they're going to be building a building there, and they talked about they're going to have to below grade the power lines there. From 21st to 20th, they're below grade. From 20th to 19th, they're above grade. And from 19th to 18th, they're below grade. So we're kind of the piece in between that needs to go below. When they build their building, or when they start their building, they're going to have to they're going to have to put the lines below grade during the course of construction of the subterranean parking garage. So it's not going to come later. But we didn't want, and that negotiation with the neighbor happened after we submitted the drawing. So it wasn't a case of us trying to hide something from staff or you.
So just to make sure I've understood then, well, actually, I'm not really clear. If the power lines are undergrounded, do we know whether that 10-foot requirement would go away, or would it have to be waived through action here today?
The 10-foot, I'm sorry. The 10.
It's from a pole, yeah, you have to have a.
Yeah, the 10-foot, it's a radius around the lines.
Yeah.
That's an Edison requirement.
It's not the
It's not
It's an Edison, that's right.
There's no other city setback requirement
No.
in that location.
It's an Edison requirement.
My question's answered. Thank you.
I can't wait to hear Nina, because she's been waiting.
She's busy.
She's busy.
You done?
Ready to go?
You have something?
I don't have questions.
No, that's what I'm saying.
I can
can't
speak
wait.
now?
Yeah, no.
May I request that we take a break, because I'm about to pop?
Okay. Should we get back?
Unless you want to talk first, Jim.
Let's come back here in 5 minutes. Is that enough?
It depends. Yeah, 5 minutes is fine. Well, there's not a delicate way to say it. I'm back.
Great. I think we're.
Can we call the meeting back to order?
14.
We back?
Oh, we finished any commissioners' discussion? Oh,
Oh, Nina, we've been waiting for
I don't
this.
have any more questions because we've talked about the slope.
I was going to start the discussion, but you go ahead.
You've asked so many questions about the slope, I think I understand it perfectly. I also happen to have the topographical map from the city website.
Wait, but what happened on the site in 1885?
I'll tell you later. So basically, what I was, the thing, when I spoke to Mr. Falonis on the phone and what he said here today, is the placement of the floor plate is so that we have two important entrances that are both on grade is, to me, the most driving force. It's an architectural thing, it's an equity thing so that, you know, differently abled people can all use the same entrance, and that's the kind of thing we want. And I feel like that is the driver that enables us to make the finding. And it's supported by our mobility division that said that 12 feet is sufficient. So I think that one is super easy to me. And then the other one, the other variance about the articulation, the third floor balcony, as is, you know, Mr. Falonis's signature way of reinterpreting step back to become an architectural feature, which is what makes the buildings interesting and unique. And it's a bummer that that step back doesn't get credit on the other elevation also, but it does, in fact, in spirit, create that articulation that we're looking for. And even though it is a corner parcel and a street-facing frontage on 19th Street, it is still technically the secondary elevation of the building. And so, to me, the glass atrium creates enough of an interest, which is what the step back is supposed to do, that, and it has that fin, and it does, and there's a lot of interest even in the glass and the way that curtain wall is constructed, that I feel that it meets the intent of the law, and architecturally that it also makes the finding. And so that is what I wanted to say.
Well, it's worth waiting for.
Thank you.
I just want to repeat what, I don't want to repeat, I want to ditto what Nina said. I think this, God, this is one of the most attractive buildings we've seen in a very long time. And my hat's off to the designers who did it. I think it's really, really beautiful. And I think the intent of the step back is more than met, you know, by how you treated the facades. And I think the findings could easily be made for both the waiver and the minor modification. And I'm prepared to do that tonight, but I'll wait, let somebody else.
do we have a motion?
Well, I wanted to make two comments.
I wasn't done.
You weren't done, but there was this question. So were you
What?
done? If you're not done, I'll wait.
Well, now I've lost my train of thought.
Sorry. There's no train.
No, I mean, I've said what I'm going to say. I'm prepared to approve this tonight, and I think the findings can be made, and we can work on that, but I think it's pretty clear that if we required a step back, the architecture would suffer, and that architecture was unanimously approved by the ARB for good reason, with no discussion, and I don't want to fool around with it. I mean, in my opinion, as Nina said, I think that the step back intent is met by the way they treated the facades. There's no question in my mind that that's the case. And I also understand the first floor needing to be at one level, and the alley at 6 feet elevation dictates that. And so it makes, I think the findings can be made, and I'm for approving the whole project.
Right. Okay.
You want to go?
Yeah, I want to say two things, because I think part of what Commissioner Fresco was doing was establishing the record for the justification and for the findings. And if I may, I don't know how many people are familiar with the other side of 19th Street, the west side of 19th Street. There's a sort of, okay, so you know that that's not just a building that's bumping up against the street. There's like a walkway, there's some landscaping, and I think that knowing that side of the street, the other thing that the atrium does is complement that side of the street very well. So I want to acknowledge that the building is appropriate in its context, and that particular space, looking at it from the west side, provides depth that complements the slight open space on the west side of 19th Street. And I think that also makes it appropriate. My understanding is that they're using low E glass, which I'm not sure what that does for glare, but that it's going to be, it's not going to suddenly flash, bright light in everybody's face as the day comes to an end. The other thing that I think it's worth noting about the architecture is that they are addressing what is still an odd first-story height. I mean, it's still a very, very tall first floor. And if you can see how they've used the cladding to kind of reset our visual expectations about what's at scale from the street, and I think they've done a creative job of that. So I do think that, the totality of the architecture, which is excellent, really does justify the deviation from code. They've got a notch at the corner so that it's a smoother kind of curve around the corner. The last thing is, if I understand everything correctly, if we were to disapprove this, the only appropriate headline would be Santa Monica disapproves proposed commercial building because it is not tall enough. And I don't want that headline. I'm happy to make them, I know what the motion needs to be, if that's helpful. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to move that we continue this item to December 18th and direct staff to bring back a CEQA exemption document and documentation to approve the waiver, approve the minor mod, approve the development review permit, approve the conditional use permit, and adopt the statement of official action that incorporates the two voluntary conditions that were offered by the applicant, including the no stopping signs in the alley and the engagement, to the extent that there are any, of the valet staff to maintain the flow of traffic in the alley and make sure that any deliveries don't misuse the alley.
Second.
Can we have a bit of discussion, just because I didn't make my comments on this, and I don't know if Pierre has any either. I'm a huge fan of the design. I think it's great. I think step backs were put into the code because there are bad designers out there, and there are developers who will maximize every square inch. Michael's not that designer, and his team's not that designer, so it was a great design, and I'm glad that he brought this vision to us. I also think it's interesting, the CUP in this was because, I remember when we first did this, it was because we were afraid of medical office in this community because it generates too much traffic. I find that interesting because I'm at the point where it's not just me going to the hospital, but having to go to taking parents and other things. We're blessed to have this level of care in our community, and we should be happy and support stuff like this. So I think this is a very appropriate use. It's something that's needed. It's a great location, and I'm fully prepared to support this motion.
I just want to point out, when you look at the monoliths next door proposed, that really does highlight the excellence of this design. And by the way, they have no step backs.
Commissioner?
I don't have much more to add, but I think I would like to say that I'm convinced as it relates to the loading clearance situation, that there is a site condition that would, in my view, justify the waiver. And as it relates to the the facade articulation, I do think that it meets the spirit of the provisions. I think it's unfortunate that the provisions aren't more flexible.
Can I just sort of add, because I want to be clear, because this use of the waiver in this manner, especially in the way the commission's discussing it in terms of architecture, it's probably actually the first time since the code was adopted in 2015. So to be clear, this is establishing a precedent in how the commission reviews all future projects that use this, and you must apply it consistently going forward. So that being said, I think I also heard, as part of the discussion tonight, the sustainability considerations with respect to the atrium, why that sort of, that volume of that space needs to be there. I think we heard that testimony from the applicant tonight, and it seemed that the commission also considered that in your deliberations in making the decision to approve the waiver.
I want to acknowledge that by way of saying that as we've had this conversation, I've also been thinking about what it means to be having objective design standards, because to a certain extent, part of what we're talking about with the reallocation of step back space is implicitly suggesting that there are other ways for us to solve massing considerations in Santa Monica. And if this were not a discretionary project, I think it's clear that hands would have been tied, because the interpretation of the code was the interpretation of the code that staff brought to us, reflecting what's in the code. So I want to flag that in the sense that I think that this project demonstrates that there are creative ways to solve the problem to the point that step backs are maybe crutches for bad design or excuses for wedding cake projects. I want to acknowledge that it opens a challenge for us. How do we get into the world of objective design standards and still hope to accomplish, have a built environment in our community that is both creative and flexible and, as high quality as this one is? I'm acknowledging the dilemma that Jing is posing.
We have to be flexible.
Yeah. But I think what I heard Jean say was she wanted us to add a little more color to our findings so that we're not just hanging our hat on just the architecture.
Thank
So
you.
when
Yes.
somebody comes back in the future and says, hey, I got this architecture and you approved this before. So I think I agree the sustainability aspect of that atrium adds to this. And I believe the light and air of it. I also think I know it's odd, but I like the high ceiling heights. And we've always said that that's a sustainability. We've always argued at times those are sustainability features. So I appreciate you giving us that warning, and I do think we should add in the sustainability aspect.
Agreed. And if I may, as you're drafting this, I do think that the alley slope poses a unique site-specific constraint that may not be present in similar future applications to the extent that you're concerned about precedent. So we may, there may be a half dozen other parcels where you've got weird slope in the back of the property with a loading zone in the alley requirement, but I think there is a unique characteristic here that we might want to document.
Well, what's more unique
justify.
about it is that it's diagonal across the parcel, that there's a slope on both elevations, and
Yeah.
that's, I looked at the topographical maps of the city at home. I couldn't make it come up here. But most of our parcels, 2/3, have slopes that are parallel to one property line or another.
Yeah, and in this case, you've got 2%, and then 4% on the back line. Yeah.
Okay. So we have a motion?
We did, that's
Can we get a motion?
We have the motion.
We
It's on
have.
the floor.
Can we vote on it?
Yep, okay.
That's a thought.
Commissioner Chaco,
Yes.
Commissioner Fresco,
Yes.
Commissioner Lambert,
Yes.
Commissioner Landris.
Yes.
Commissioner Reese.
Yes.
And Chair Tolkien.
Yes. I guess the next thing is resolutions, which there are none.
The what?
Written communications, which there are none. planning commission member discussion items? Any?
No.
Then the time is now 8:28. I adjourn the meeting.
All right.